My name is Joan Clinefelter. I am a professor of history over at the University of Northern Colorado. I was hired by this guy right here. Barry Rothhaus is the one who hired me for the job at UNC. So I've been there about 23, 24 years, something like that. And my specialty is modern Germany, so Europe, modern Germany, and particularly the Third Reich. And once Dr. Rothhaus retired, I have the great opportunity to teach the Holocaust, which, if any of you are interested, I am teaching the Holocaust, not this year, but next spring. And it's a semester-long course on heartbreak. But if anybody is interested in sitting on the class, that would certainly be possible. So I was asked to give a presentation that would sort of set up kind of the framework for a lot of the other events that are going on this week. So this is a relatively introductory presentation on the Holocaust. And I hope that even if you know a lot about the Holocaust, there will be some things here, particularly towards the end, that you haven't seen before. And there'll be plenty of time for questions. This should take half an hour, 40 minutes at the most. I'm hoping it'll be more on the half-hour side. And here you can see these are the two big questions that I want to deal with. How did the Jews respond to their persecution, and why did they respond that way? And then this other question's a little odd. How did the Nazis make anti-Semitism invisible to the Germans? And that requires a little bit of explanation. What I mean by the Nazis making anti-Semitism invisible is that once the Third Reich got going, the Germans didn't think of themselves, as they came to adopt the Nazi way of thinking, as being anti-Semites. They thought that they were defending Germany. Because from the Nazi point of view, the Jews represented an existential death to Germany, a real threat. And as a result, one of the things that the Nazis do is that they normalize anti-Semitism. And in this way, they create a whole new kind of moral universe, a universe in which normal values, treating people as though they are actual people, completely go away. At least with regard to the racial enemies of the Nazis. And that's what I want to explain. So let me start with a little story, and I think you'll get a sense of what I mean. So in 1940, there was a young man who was a member of the Hitler Youth Organization. And he remembers a day where the Germans came into his village, and they arrested all the Jews in the village, and they deported them off to the east. And one of the people that was deported was Alfons Heck's best friend, whose name was Heinz. And after the war, Heck has written a book about his time as a Hitler Youth and what he thought when he was a Hitler Youth. And he was reflecting on this, and he says, you know, the thing is that at the time, I did not think to myself how terrible it is that the Nazis are deporting the Jews, including my best friend Heinz. Instead, he thought to himself, how unfortunate it is that my friend Heinz is a Jew. And because he was a Jew, he therefore had to go. And Alfons Heck, by 1940, just 7 years after Nazi rule, had entered this different moral universe. And so even though he still regarded Heinz as his friend, which was really relatively unusual by this point, because most Germans had lost contact with their German friends. It was basically, it's too bad he's Jewish, not why are the Nazis persecuting the Jews. So what I want to do today is kind of walk us through how this happened on a kind of step-by-step basis. And then along the way, I've got some questions for you. And at the end, I hope you will have some questions for me as well. So in Mein Kampf, Hitler's part autobiography, part political screed, he argued that the Jews represented an internal threat to the Germans, and they should be eliminated from Germany. He doesn't talk about killing them. He wants them just eliminated from Germany.
Did you say an internal threat or an eternal threat?
Internal and eternal. So both. He did not declare that the Jews would be killed. There was no discussion of gas chambers. The gas chambers are not thought of really on a large scale, at least, until the fall of 1941. And it's really clear he believes that the Jews have to be gotten rid of. They have to get out of Germany. And this process begins in 1933. And the initial goal of the Nazis, really up until World War II ends up breaking out and a little bit beyond that, was to get the Jews out of Germany, to encourage them to emigrate as much as he possibly could. So first they're going to remove the Jews from influential positions. Then they're going to isolate them and sort of turn them into social pariahs and try to get the Jews to emigrate voluntarily. So the Nazis are going to promote anti-Semitism and indifference to Jews. And I would argue that the indifference to Jews was in a lot of ways more deadly than out-and-out anti-Semitism. Over time, the Nazis are going to teach the Germans how to think of the Jews as other, as being racial outsiders. Because the Third Reich was very much a racial state. One was either a member of the national community, the Volksgemeinschaft, a racially pure German, in which case there were real benefits to be had. Membership had its privileges, and then there were racial outsiders. The Jews were the number one racial outsider, but there were others as well. Handicapped Germans, mentally and physically handicapped Germans, homosexuals, gypsies, all different kinds of people could potentially be outside of the people, the folk, to use the Nazis' term. So what the Nazis need to do is make it clear that German Jews are not Germans. They are Jews, first and foremost. Now, there are some oddities about the Third Reich that are rather different, particularly different than what we see in Eastern Europe when the Nazis go into Poland. There are no ghettos inside of Germany. There are Jew houses. These were typically formed after the war started. These were apartments that were usually in very poor parts of town and not in very good conditions. And there were times where Jews were forced out of their homes and required to live in these designated so-called Jew houses. The Star of David. Jews in Germany don't wear the Star of David to identify them as Jews until September of 1941. Relatively late. In Poland, the Jews have to wear the Star of David as soon as the Nazis defeat Poland. So by early November of 1939, the Jews in Poland will have to wear the Star of David. Half-Jews, and I'll get into later on this concept of what a half-Jew actually is, they're most often not deported. And they're often not imprisoned either. They're used as forced laborers. Their rights are definitely restricted, but they are typically not deported. And most of the so-called half-Jews end up surviving the Third Reich as a result. Now, it's very important to remember that the Jews were always a very small minority of the German population, less than 1%. So in 1933, there are about 500,000 Jews inside of Germany, and they're highly assimilated. They dress like everybody, and the German Jews really feel that they are German, and they have great loyalty to the fatherland. Jews fought in very high numbers in the Great War to defend the fatherland, for example. They experienced all the trials and difficulties of the Republic and the Great Depression. As well. They came from all walks of life. They were educated, uneducated, rich, poor. Most lived in large cities, but many also lived in small towns as well. And when the Third Reich began, most of the Jews believe that this can't possibly last very long. This has to just be temporary. Because remember, they don't know how this is all going to turn out. Nobody could imagine in 1933 that by 1942, the Germans would be committing mass murder in Poland with the gas chambers. The Jews then are going to act as a way, so they're basically trying to hope that things will get better. Each law that is passed that restricts their rights might very well be the last one, so there's no compelling reason to leave. Also, the Jews are acting within an established pattern of history. There had long been persecution against Jews, and typically the Jews did one or two things to survive such persecution. One, tolerate it, withstand it by strong family ties and strong communal ties, and wait until the bad times passed, or leave and go someplace else. And you will see the Jews are going to do both things during the Nazi regime. Now, one of the very first anti-Jewish actions begins on the 1st of April in 1933. So the Nazis take power at the end of January 1933. In March, there are elections. The Nazis never win a majority of the vote. The best they ever do is about 44% of the vote. But they convince the German Congress, the Reichstag, to pass a law that gives Hitler, the Chancellor of Germany, the right to pass laws on his own authority for the next 4 years. This would be as if our Congress gave the president the right to pass laws on his own authority for the next 4 years. It would be a similar kind of thing. So this is how Hitler initially gets his power. And on April 1st, they announced a nationwide boycott against Jews. And the Jewish businesses were identified. You had SA men standing outside of the businesses, intimidating people with these signs that say, "German, do not buy from Jews." The thing is that by and large, this boycott was a spectacular failure. Germans went out of their way to go into many of these shops and to talk to the Jewish storekeepers and say, "We do not believe this." And the Nazis realized this. They realized at this point that they're going to have to teach the Germans how to be anti-Semitic. And they're going to have to break the social bonds between German Jews and their non-Jewish German friends. And the Nazis, let me make sure I didn't skip something I didn't. The Nazis are going to do this by what's called the legal revolution. They're going to pass a series of laws that are going to begin to isolate the Jews from the public life of Germany. And this puts the Germans who might be against these laws in a really difficult position. Because if they were to protest these laws or turn against these laws, then those protesters are by definition criminals and then fall under the persecution of the regime. So there were great risks involved. The use of laws also cloaks the radicalism of what the Nazis are doing, because it's this clear, orderly, legal kind of process. So here are a number of laws that are passed in 1933, directed against doctors in Berlin, for example. We've got the boycott. On the 7th of April, Jews were excluded from the civil service. So public teachers, professors, postmen, firemen, policemen, those kinds of positions, they were all fired from those positions. I should note that this law was not directed solely at the Jews. It would also targeted members of the Social Democratic Party, kind of a democratic party, and also the Communist political party as well. So they were also purged. So those Germans who didn't want to pay attention to the anti-Jewish part of the laws could simply say, "Oh, well, this is all right. We're getting rid of the communists. This is good. We're getting rid of the socialists. This is also good. These are our political enemies." They pass a law in April against the so-called overcrowding in the schools and universities. Schools could not have a population of more than 5% of Jewish students. Now, this only really had an effect in large cities. Most Germans at this time live in towns of smaller than 10,000. And in a lot of places, there were just a few Jewish families. And in those places, this law would have no effect. But over time, German children are going to persecute, they're going to learn to persecute their Jewish friends, and again, break those bonds of friendship. On the 14th of July, any Jews that had been naturalized, had naturalized citizenship, so say somebody from Poland who moved to Germany after World War I and became a naturalized citizen, they lose their citizenship inside of Germany. Now, all these laws are bad enough, but they have a problem, and that is that they don't identify who is Jewish. And so one of the first laws that starts talking really about who is Jewish and who is not Jewish, at least a little bit, are the Nuremberg race laws. And these were passed at the Nuremberg rally, so every autumn, every fall, the Nazis would have a huge Nazi party rally held in Nuremberg. And this is why they're called the Nuremberg Laws. And this is the Reich citizenship law and the law for the protection of German blood and German honor. You can see it's passed in September of 1935, and it makes it clear of a Reich citizen is somebody who's German or of related blood who proves by their conduct that they are willing to faithfully serve the Third Reich. They have to be granted a citizenship certificate, and only Reich citizens have these full political rights. There's another article that says that Jews and Germans may not have sexual relationships with each other, and that German families cannot employ Jewish families cannot employ German maids, housekeepers. The idea being that somehow the father of the Jewish family would prey upon the Jewish maid. Now, Jews couldn't be citizens, and so they're subjects of the states with absolutely no rights. But do you see anything missing here? What's missing here that you might expect to see in a law that everybody points to and says, oh, well, this is the law that identifies who's Jewish and who's not Jewish? Do you see anything missing? Yeah, there isn't a visual. It doesn't say who's Jewish. It doesn't say, well, what constitutes a Jew, right? What makes somebody Jewish? And they realize, oh, we have a problem. We need to pass a supplement. And so they pass a supplemental law in November to the Nuremberg Laws. And here's where they define who is Jewish and who is not. So a full Jew is somebody who is either an active Jew, active in their faith, goes to synagogue, identifies as a Jew, or somebody who has at least 3 Jewish grandparents. So this means that you could, and this often was the case, have an individual who never stepped foot in a synagogue, never identified as being Jewish, and all of a sudden they're Jewish because they have at least 3 grandparents who are Jewish. Then they have these different grades of being Jews. Mischling, first degree, those had 2 Jewish grandparents, but no other connection to the Jewish faith. And a second degree Mischling had 1 Jewish grandparent. And the reason they go back to the grandparents' generation is because in the 1880s and 1890s, right after Germany unified, a number of Jews converted to either Catholicism or Protestantism. But according to the Nazis, you could no more convert your way out of being Jewish than you could convert your eye color. Because according to the Nazis, Judaism isn't a religion, it's a race. Yeah?
So the grandparents, though, were self-identified Jews?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I just spilled water all over myself. You can edit that out, right? Yeah, so it was very typical that when a child was born, on the birth certificate, their faith is registered. And this was, again, really, really typical. So again, you could have somebody who, say, they're 20 years old in 1935, and it says on their birth certificate that they are Catholic. But they're only Catholic because their grandparents converted to Catholicism, say, in 1888. Well, now all of a sudden, that person is not Catholic. That person is Jewish. And so there literally were people who woke up one morning and discovered all of a sudden that they were Jewish. So this is how they end up defining Jewishness. And you can see the numbers, about 330,000 full Jews, 64,000 first degree Mischling and 42,000 second degree Mischlinge. And Mischlinge is a really vile term. It is not something that you want to call anybody at all. Now, even before the Nuremberg Laws, local Nazis and Germans took matters into their own hands. And they're going to start beginning to make it clear, we are German and you are not. And in part, this feeling is fed by the laws and also the fact that Germans are going to get benefits. When Jews are kicked out of their jobs, for example, it's Germans who get hired, particularly Nazi Party members. This is one of the reasons why Nazi Party membership really grows after 1933. Now, we know about some of what's going on inside of Nazi Germany at the time. They don't really have public opinion polling at this time, but there's this organization, an underground organization called SOPADA. And this is the Social Democratic Party, the SPD party, that's gone underground. And the party leadership is first in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, and then in London. But they have contacts inside of Germany who are kind of keeping a pulse on public opinion, particularly among the working class. And they send these reports back to Prague and to London, and we have these reports. So they're a good indication of what's going on at the local level. So this SOPADA report notes about the growing terror about the Jews. And they say that the Jews are being driven into a modern ghetto, even though they're not physically in real ghettos. And they have all these places that are forbidding entry of Jews. They're not letting Jews come into the town. They're not selling real estate. They're not letting Jews go to the libraries or use streetcars. The restaurants won't serve Jews. Businesses refuse to sell to Jews. Restaurants and cafes also have signs outside saying Jews are not welcome. They can't go to swimming pools, bathing facilities. Race defilers are people who are in relationships, romantic relationships with Jews. And they are being hauled out. Often they will have their heads shaved. They'll be forced to wave signs and march through the town and often dragged to concentration camps. Now, what I did was I took all these cities that are mentioned in this SOPADA document and plotted them out on a map. And so each one of these places here represents a place that's mentioned in this document where they have all these signs about Jews not welcome. Anything you notice? Anything you notice here by this image or that strikes you by this image? And these aren't people that are forced to do this. These are individuals who are doing it themselves. Yes?
The concentration in that one.
Yeah, there's definitely a concentration right in here and kind of all along here. Yeah. Far less in Catholic areas. The Catholics tended to persecute the Jews a little bit less than the Protestants because the Catholics had been persecuted by the German government back in the 1870s. And they remembered that. Tends to be small towns, these small towns that you've never ever heard of. And a lot of times these small towns had no Jews. But here's a way to demonstrate their loyalty to the regime. We don't want any Jews in these places. So here are some of the signs. Jews are not welcome here. That's what this sign says as well. And this picture, I think, is really striking because you've got people out on their bikes. It looks like it's a really nice day. And here they've got this banner excluding people from entering, or Jews, warning Jews that they're not welcome to come into this town. There were also park benches that said Jews cannot sit here, or in this case, Aryans only. That's what this park bench says. So increasingly, public spaces are being shut down to Jews. And I think this picture kind of captures this invisibility of anti-Semitism. So what does this picture look like? Can you tell what's going on in this picture at all?
Looks like a little girl in a bathing suit.
Yeah, a little girl in a bathing suit. This is a swimming pool over here. And there's this little sign right here that says Jews are forbidden entry. Jews can't come in. And it's just part of the landscape, right? Surrounded by roses, right? Doesn't look threatening at all. This is 1935. And again, the Jews can't come into the swimming pool. And this is from some work that was done at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, a program called Some Were Neighbors. And so I have heisted some images from them as a result. Here's another picture. The Jews are our misfortune. This is a quote from a famous German historian in the late 1800s. Anything you notice about this picture? They seem to just be going about their daily business, right? There aren't people who are pointing at it and saying, oh, how horrible, this is terrible. Again, it's become part of the landscape, part of the everyday. This is just how things are. You just have to accept it and go on and slowly kind of absorb it. And one of the things you'll see is lots of people here are wearing uniforms, particularly the men. Now, during the 1936 Olympics that were held in the Winter Olympics are in Garmisch-Kirchen. In the summer, they're in Berlin. And it's often claimed that anti-Nazi laws stopped, or anti-Jewish laws stopped it. And that's actually not the case. In Berlin, signs that said Jews are not welcome disappeared for the time period of the Olympics. But a whole host of other laws are following. Jews cannot be veterinarians, tax consultants, teachers, auctioneers, gun dealers. Jews have to register all of their assets, all of their wealth, over 5,000 marks. It becomes illegal to transfer one's assets to a non-Jew. They don't want people giving their money to their friends, so then the friends can give it to the Jews and then have the Jews take that wealth out of the country. The Jews have to get new middle names. Every Jewish woman is given the middle name of Sarah. Every Jewish man is given the name of Israel as their middle name. And businesses are increasingly pressured to close. Jewish children are going to be expelled. And Jews also have to get the right for permission to move. And for some reason, they're denied the right to have carrier pigeons, which gives you an idea of the absurd kind of levels that these laws would go. So here are these identity papers marked right on the front with a J for Judah, so that right away people know that they have to surrender their papers. Now, so far, most Jews had not been forced into concentration camp. Violence on the streets was a daily threat. There was lots of violence, random violence committed against the Jews. That's all going to change, and things are going to get much worse in November of 1938, when a young Polish Jew, Herschel Greenspan, assassinates a minor embassy official in the German embassy in Paris. And this becomes an excuse to unleash the first public state-sponsored pogrom against the German Jews inside of the Third Reich. Now, the Nazis claimed that this was a spontaneous uprising by people so disgusted by the Jews at this point. In fact, we know that the SA and the SS conducted most of these attacks. Jewish businesses are going to be looted. Jewish homes are going to be broken into and looted and destroyed as well. And fire departments are ordered to let Jewish businesses burn and to let Jewish synagogues burn.
Excuse me, what's SA?
The SA are the Sturmabteilung. They're the Stormtrooper troops, the guys in the brown shirts, as opposed to the SS, which are sort of the cream of the crop, the most racially pure members of the Nazi Party who are always dressed in black, okay? So the insurance companies don't have to pay for any of the damage. In fact, every Jewish family is going to be taxed, given a 20% tax to pay for all the cleanup of the night of broken glass. So the Nazis destroyed German homes, businesses, and synagogues, and the Jews have to pay for the cleanup from that. And this has an enormous impact on German Jews, because now it's clear that simply following the laws is not going to save you, that it's going to become increasingly impossible to be able to survive this kind of persecution. All these black dots are on here represent major places, but not all of the places that synagogues burned on the night of November 9th and November 10th in 1938.
Even in Austria.
Oh yeah, because by this point, Austria is part of the Third Reich. It has been absorbed and is a new state inside of Germany. For the first time, large numbers of Jewish men are arrested. About roughly one out of every 5 Jewish men, about 20,000 Jewish men are arrested and sent to concentration camps. These are images from Dachau. And this was the model camp that most other camps were formulated along, modeled after. And Theodor Eicke trains Rudolf Höss, who's the commandant of Auschwitz eventually. So the Jewish men, when they're arrested and they're marched to concentration camps, again, what do you notice here? I'm actually going to go to the next slide. What do you notice here? So here are the Jewish men being marched to concentration camps. Anything that surprises you here? What do you see in this picture?
Crowds of locals?
Crowds of locals. This was not done secretly. They're marched through the streets. And people are not protesting. They are watching them go. And in some instances, there's kind of this festival feel about this. Here we've got these young women who are laughing. There's some other people in the background who are laughing as well. This guy down here looks fairly pleased. But again, you've got lots of people watching this go on. This was not done under cover of darkness. Unlike the boycott, Germans now are not going to be protesting. In part, they're afraid, but in part, many of them have begun to internalize what Alphonse Heck had internalized. What a shame. These men are Jewish. They just have to go. They just have to go. And this is from Oldenburg. I also stole this from the Holocaust Museum. Businesses are Aryanized. Jewish businesses are forced to sell out, often to their former German competitors. And so this picture says Stamm and Bassermann, formerly Weil rubber goods. So here's a Jewish business that has been bought out. And by 1939, nearly all Jewish businesses have been forced to shut down. They're basically impoverishing the Jews, trying to get them to make that decision to leave Germany. And you can see here that, in fact, German Jews do leave. More than half of all German Jews do leave Germany. But it's an enormously difficult decision, right? How miserable would things have to get before you'd be willing to pack up and leave the United States and leave everything that you have here behind? That's the position that the Jews are put into, and a whole new language. Plus, the Great Depression is going on in these countries, and they don't want refugees. They don't want them in. And you can see here that the numbers are spiking. So here's 1933, the first year of the Third Reich. 1936, there's a little blip up because, again, of those laws that are passed, despite the fact that the Olympics are going on. And then the numbers really increase in 1938. And in 1939, they're going to increase a little bit more as well. So these immigration rates track with events. They go to lots of different places. Shanghai, Palestine, Central and South America, the United States as well. And many of them also flee to Western European countries, where when the Nazis take over these countries by 1940 in World War II, they're going to be at great risk again. Now, a lot of German Jews now do try to get out. The United States doesn't take any action. We do not change our quotas. We do not distinguish between Germans who want to leave and Jewish Germans who want to leave. We don't change our immigration laws at all. Many of you maybe know Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father, wrote to the President of the United States, FDR, to try and get permission to bring his family to the United States. And FDR says, "I'm sorry, I cannot help you. You're going to have to go through the regular application process that all refugees have to go through." But there are British citizens and German Jews who decide that they are going to do their best to get the children out. And this is the Kindertransport, the children's transport that takes place from 1938 to 1940. The British are going to make it possible for these children to be able to be brought in, and they're working with these committees, the Committees for Jews in Germany and the Movement for Care of Children for Germany. These are British organizations. And the government agrees to accept a certain number of children. They don't have a fixed number, as long as they're under the age of 17. And they're from Germany, former Austria, and former Czech lands, because by this point, the Sudetenland has been taken by the spring of 1939, or spring of 1938, and fall of 1938. And then by the spring of 1939, the rest of Czechoslovakia is going to be absorbed. Now, every child has to have a British sponsor. Remember, the Great Depression is still going on. So the Brits have to promise, we will take care of this child, they will not go on the welfare rolls, and we will be responsible for their care and for their education as well. And the assumption is that when the crisis is over, the families will be reunited, but in fact, most often they never saw, the children never saw their parents again.
Are there any figures of how many?
Yes, and I've got that in just a second. Okay. So they're going to be rescuing Jews from Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, and also Germany, and this is the path that they're going to end up taking. And priorities given to children whose parents are in concentration camps or who are political prisoners, because not all of the children who are rescued are Jews, or orphans. And this rescue effort is often done by private individuals. One of the best examples is Nicholas Winton, who's a stockbroker, who goes to Prague at the request of a friend. And he sees all of these refugees, and he, in his apartment, he just decides to work with this British Committee of Refugees. He just opens an office in his apartment in Prague, and he just starts writing passes. He has no authority to do so. He takes the authority for himself, and he just puts himself in charge of the children's section. And families come to him, and he works with them to get his children out. He personally helped rescue 669 children. Some are Jews, but many are not. The first transport leaves Britain in December of 1938. The last transport is May 1940 from the Netherlands. That's the day that Netherlands surrenders. And between 9,000 and 10,000 children are saved, and about 7,500 Jewish children are saved. And you have to imagine the thought process of the parents. So here's the example of two parents, Dr. Friedrich and Gertruda Schulhoff. He lost his job when Austria was absorbed into the Third Reich. And the Night of Broken Glass convinces their daughter Erica, her parents are convinced that they have to send her away. She's their only child. And they're going to pack her up, and they're going to put her on a train, and they're going to send her off to England, where she's housed in a convent. She converts to Catholicism, and after the war, she does emigrate to the United States. Her parents were deported to the Łódź ghetto in Poland, and they were most likely murdered in Chełmno. If they were not murdered at this death camp, they then starved or died of disease inside of the Łódź ghetto. I promise I'm almost done. So German Jews began to be deported from Germany to the east, to the ghettos in the east, in 1941. And by 1942, they're sent directly from Germany to the death camps. And most Jews don't know exactly what's going on, but they know very bad things are going on because people who are deported are often not heard from again. And the Germans know the same thing. And so here are major cities with deportation centers. Most of the German Jews are going to be sent to Auschwitz, but they will also be sent to other places. These are ghettos here in the east. Here's Auschwitz, located right here. And all the death camps are basically in this area, right in here. There's 6 of them, 6 death camps. Concentration camps and death camps, very different things. Death camps are designed to do one thing: kill human beings. At Treblinka, the guards bragged that it took 45 minutes from door to door. 45 minutes from the time that the door of the railroad cars opened up to the doors that the gas chambers slammed shut. So they processed them all very, very quickly. And our best guess is that over 900,000 individuals perished at Treblinka alone. Auschwitz is the best known because that's where most Western Jews ended up being sent. And it was also not just a death camp, it was also a concentration camp. And so there was actually survivors from Auschwitz, as opposed to the other camps where most often, if there are 50 survivors, that's a huge number. For example, from Sobibor, there are about 50 survivors from Sobibor, one of the death camps. Now, these deportations in Germany are not secret. They're often done in the full view of their friends and their neighbors. So what do you see in this picture?
Little ladies.
Yeah, these little ladies right here and this younger woman, these are Jews that have been removed from their homes, spent the night in a gymnasium, and now they're going to the trains that will take them to the east, most likely to Auschwitz. And you can see there's all kinds of onlookers here. And this is probably this is a relatively small town. These are their neighbors, their friends, or used to be. But now they've lost contact. And yet they're curious enough that they're going to come out and watch and see what's going on, what's happening. So this next slide illustrates how much had changed by 1942. In 1933, the Germans do not go along with the boycott. By 1942, they're willingly watching as their former friends and neighbors are being sent away to some mysterious fate in the East. So I want to see if you can tell what's going on in this photograph. And I think the first way to figure out is, can you tell what these are right down here? So this is a group of plates. This is a pot that has some dishes in it. Here's another stack of dishes. There's a teapot here. There's all kinds of household goods stretched out on this table.
Oh, they're buying their possessions.
They're buying their possessions. It's a public auction. This is a public auction. This takes place in the same place that we just saw the crowds watching their former friends and neighbors go off into the train cars. Here they are. They're gathering for an auction for their Jewish neighbors' belongings. And they know that this is where these belongings are from. And
all the deprivation of their belongings and the reselling of them are legal.
yes, absolutely legal. Yep. And here is a newspaper account from the Jewish Daily Telegraph Agency based in New York that gives an article that describes exactly that image that you've just seen. So I don't know how well you can see it. I really hate it when people read off of PowerPoints. It sort of drives me crazy. But I'm going to go ahead and read it because most of you can't see it. So here's what it says. The headline is, "Huge crowds jam German auction rooms to buy confiscated Jewish possessions." Huge crowds attending pre-Christmas auctions of confiscated Jewish goods in the leading German cities paid fantastically high prices after spirited bidding for each article. It is reported by Berlin correspondents of the Stockholm newspapers. Although new house furnishings, when available, cost only a third of the price paid for many of the articles sold at the auctions, the scarcity of consumer goods and the German people's fear of imminent inflation produced the rush to buy these Jewish-owned furnishings. Ordinary couches bought 1,000 marks, nominally $400. Upholstered armchairs were sold for 400 marks. 75 marks were paid for ordinary cotton bed sheets.
And who got the money?
This money typically goes to the state. Sometimes it goes to the municipal authorities. But this is a way for the Nazi state or city governments to take in some hard cash. Yeah. So again, we can end here with Alphonse Heck. He's not going to think how terrible it is they're deporting the Jews. Instead, it's how unfortunate that my good friend Heinz is Jewish. This is what Claudia Kuntz, who's a historian, has termed the Nazi conscience. I should say Nazi conscience, sorry. He'd come to accept the fact that Jews represented a danger that had to be removed. And that required that he no longer think about what would happen to his friend Heinz. He'd entered this different moral universe. And that's precisely what the Nazis needed to have happened in order to then carry out the next phase of their program, and that's going to be the Holocaust, which will be carried out largely in Eastern Europe. Thank you very much, and I'll take any questions that you've got. So, any questions, really, at all? Yes?
I've heard a number of people argue that some of the psychological part was based on evolution, which was very popular at the time, so it kind of justified the racial...
Yeah, so this idea, the racial battle for survival of the fittest, is that what you mean?
Well, and just the racial differences.
Yes, yes,
Purity.
yeah, this whole idea about purity. I mean, Americans talked about the American race, and the British talk about the British race, and the Germans talk about the German race. What's the most ridiculous here? I mean, first of all, there's no such thing as a German race. It just doesn't exist. There's no such thing as Aryans. They never existed. They're just mythical creatures that many of the Nazis actually believed that the Aryans were the descendants of the survivors of the island of Atlantis. That gives you an idea of how nutty they are, right? And of course, Judaism is not a race. You can have black Jews and white Jews and Native American Jews and Asian Jews. It's not a race. Maybe in some instances an ethnicity, but it is first and foremost a religion. But that's not how the Nazis see it at all. Yeah, Marcus?
I'm sure there's lots of background history, but I was kind of curious about the German Protestants, German Catholics, and their reaction to the new Jewish laws.
Yeah, so there was a group of German pastors. They call themselves the Confessing Church, and they were headed by Martin Niemöller, and they do protest. They don't protest as much as they could have. And really, they're most interested in the Nazis leaving the Protestant church alone. They're much more concerned about that than they are about the Jews. The Catholics are really kind of interesting. The Catholics tended to be more willing to hide Jewish families, and there were priests who spoke out individually, but of course the Pope does not take much of a moral stand on the Jews at all. So by and large, for the churches, as long as the Nazis are not persecuting their religion, they're not going to step in and help the Jews. So yeah, it's not a good chapter for German Christianity. Yeah, Barry.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. I think what you've done is wonderful, by the way, so thank you. But one of the interesting things about this whole public interest is that one should not forget that what happened in Germany is really a revolution. It's a Nazi revolution. And our revolutions have certain characteristics which are typical of every revolution. So, for example, during the French Revolution, which I know a little bit about, when the mass executions took place in Paris and other leading cities of the country in 1792, the government had to change the course of the wagons carrying the accused because the crowds would be so immense. They'd be so happy to see these, some aristocrats, but mainly not. And most interesting, and I don't know if this is the case in Germany, I don't recall, but most interesting was it was the women who were the worst. As these carriages went through, they're the ones who spit at the prisoners. They're the ones who threw the rocks. They're the ones who did, and the government had to change the route. Because if they didn't change the route, they'd never get these people under the guillotine.
Yeah.
And
Now here, typically there are police that are sort of trying to control the crowds. And I haven't read anything where the crowds are pelting people or yelling, "Yeah, you know, good for you. We're getting rid of you," here.
but the silence is almost saying the same thing.
It almost is. Yeah, it almost is. And that's not to say that there might very well have been Germans who showed up because they wanted to see and witness what was going on. And it'd be very interesting to know, for example, where some of these, who took these photographs, right? Is this somebody who's taking the photograph who is in charge of the auction and they wanted a record of the crowd size? Or is this somebody who was there and is horrified by what's going on and wants to secretly document it, right? And it could be either. Because we do know that there were Germans who did use their cameras to document what was going on during the Third Reich. So, yes?
And wouldn't you think that they would be fearful for their own lives, if they did anything?
Yes, that's absolutely the case. And in fact, one of the things that the Nazis do really well is they use the Jews as an abject lesson. Here is what will happen to you if you are defined as not racially pure. Because not all Germans were racially fit Germans. So about 300,000 Germans were forcibly sterilized. And the Nazis assumed that 30% of the population would eventually have to be forcibly sterilized. Because, yeah, they were Germans, but they weren't racially fit Germans. The first people who were killed in rooms disguised to look like showers and have diesel gas pumped into them are not Jews, they're Germans. They're handicapped German children and adults who are killed between 1939 and 1940. And they take that equipment and the personnel who killed the mentally and physically handicapped Germans to the death camps. So they have experienced personnel. It's the same people. And often the same machinery will simply be adapted in places in the death camps of Chełmno, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belzec. The Jews are murdered with diesel gas. It's diesel gas that's pumped into the gas chambers. The pesticide Zyklon B is used primarily at Auschwitz and at Majdanek. Those are the two other death camps, both of which are also concentration camps. So there's larger numbers of survivors. Something like 67% of the Jews who are murdered in the death camps are murdered between March of 1942 and November 1943. A really small time period. And in fact, a lot of the death camps, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belzec, are razed to the ground. They're destroyed at the end of 1943 because they've done their work. They've killed all the Jews in the surrounding area. So there isn't any need for them to exist anymore. Yes?
The handicapped people that were killed and children and so on, was that also justified because they believed those were inheritable traits,
Yes.
biological?
Yes, and also these were individuals who were housed in state-run institutions. And so the idea was that they were useless eaters. So why should the state pay for the care of these individuals who will never be able to do any useful work, contribute to society? It's better to give them they called it a mercy death. Yeah, the families were not notified that their family members were being killed. They were told after the fact that they had died, and they're always told that they died of heart attacks or an outbreak of scarlet fever or appendicitis, which caused problems because sometimes Uncle Robert, who had died suddenly of appendicitis, had his appendix taken out, at age 11. So this is something that leaks out, and this is something that particularly the Catholic Church denounces from the pulpit. Now, the program is, at least briefly, shut down inside of Germany in 1940. Whether that's because of growing protests or because they had already killed the people that they had targeted for death is really unclear. But in fact, they do continue to kill handicapped people for the duration of the Third Reich. And in fact, wounded veterans and wounded veterans' families are terrified. They're terrified that they will be euthanized because that's how widely known the killing of the handicapped came to be. And this is one of the reasons why the Nazis have the death camps located in Poland. The Nazis assume that the vast majority of the German people would not tolerate such mass murder. And so they do it under cover of war, and they do it outside of the sight of the German people in Poland. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you had a question. Other questions? Anything at all? No such thing as a stupid question. Yes?
I have a little more global question. Hitler invaded Poland in like 39, and I assume Adolf Hitler, Schiffergruber, and all his associates, Eichmann, Goebbels, and Hess, and so on. This required months of planning, and yet Mussolini in Italy, they'd been in North Africa, and long before that, early in 38, Hirohito's imperial forces of Japan had already invaded the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and even into China with the rape of Nanking. They still argue about the Korea and Japan and China about all the people that were killed there. For example, 300,000 at Nanking, I think they say. And this seems to me, if it's early 38, that Hitler, Hirohito, Mussolini, this had been in the planning stages for months, if not years, ahead of time. And I kind of wonder, the way our government keeps secrets, the secret is today and it's out tomorrow.
Right.
How did they keep all these secrets for 10 years? I'm curious.
Well, there wasn't an internet. So Mein Kampf, in Mein Kampf, Hitler's very clear that he intends to go into Poland and he intends to go into Russia. The Germans are told, the German General Staff is told to prepare for the invasion of Poland in the spring of 1939. Poland's invaded in September of 1939. Hitler originally planned to go into the Soviet Union, probably in 43 or 44. He actually speeds up the invasion because they can't break Britain. So Britain is still the lone outpost in 1940. It's the only place that is not either allied with Nazi Germany or neutral in the Second World War. And when the Brits end up defeating the Germans in the Battle of Britain, in the skies over Britain, there's never going to be any naval invasion. Hitler intended to invade the Great Britain by sea in what was called Operation Sea Lion. That can't take place. And because he cannot break Britain, he decides to speed up the timetable to go into the Soviet Union, because his thinking is, once the Brits realize that the Soviet Union is not going to join an alliance with them because they will be annihilated, then Britain will have to submit. And for the United States, Hitler is not concerned about us at all, because according to Hitler's racial worldview, we are racially worthless. We are all mixed up, right? I'm French, Jewish, British, Irish, and who knows whatever else. And he's convinced that we will not be any kind of threat whatsoever. He thinks the same thing about the Russians. The Russians are Slavic peoples. They're basically a step or two above the Jews. They will be easy to wipe out. Not a problem. Yeah, famous last words. In fact, when Hitler sees in the United States vast numbers of women joining the workforce for World War II, he's convinced that's a sign that we're really weak, that we're forcing our women to work. Because German women were not required to work in the factories until very, very late, like 44. And by that time, most of the German women, many of them, realize that the war is lost. And they start saying things like, look, I'm bombed out. My husband's in the war. I've got small children. I'm not working. I am not going to go to the factories to work. And this becomes a real problem. This is one of the reasons why there are about, I think it's 35% of the German workforce in 1945 are slave laborers. They're Russians and Poles and Jews who've been brought in from the East. So here, the original intent was to get all the Jews and foreign peoples out of Germany and make Germany pure. And by the end of the war, they're actually bringing in these so-called lesser peoples because they've chewed up their entire population with the war. If you want a really good example of how stupid racism is, the Third Reich is the perfect example, right? It doesn't work. It's a ridiculous way to divide up human beings. Yeah, I mean, it's just really, really clear that this kind of racial thinking is just complete and total nonsense, but can have very deadly consequences when not unchecked. When people don't stand up and say, no, this is not right, I'm not going to just sit by and watch this and tolerate it. Yeah?
What do you know about the reversal of the brainwashing after the war?
So let me first say that this isn't brainwashing. It's something very different. Indoctrination, yes. Accepting these ideas, but not quite brainwashing. Because brainwashing, I think, assumes that they had no internal moral compass, that they had no choice, that they were like these zombies, right? And I don't buy that. They had agency. Many of them knew exactly what was going on, and they just let it happen because it wasn't happening to them, right? It wasn't happening to them. What doesn't matter to me? I can't see what's going on. Bad things are going on in the East. Okay, but my brother's in the war, my father's in the war, my son's in the war. That's what I'm going to focus on, not what's happening to some stranger in the East. And that was the same in the United States. So Thanksgiving of 1941, major newspapers had reports about the mass shooting campaigns, this now called the Holocaust by bullets, which is something that's going to be discussed all week, was publicized in the American press. And these newspapers come out around Thanksgiving of 1941. And there's only 6 newspapers that carry this story on the front pages. One of them's the Denver Post, oddly enough. So Americans could also know what was going on if they wanted to know, right? It's like what's going on in the border. Right? If you want to know what's going on in the border, you can find out. If you want to ignore what's going on in the border, you can ignore it. You don't have to think about children being separated from their families, right? People have choices, and we only have so large an attention span, right? We've got to pick our battles sometimes. But I think what's important is that you pick a battle. Pick a battle and fight that battle, because otherwise, you get something not exactly like this. This will never be replicated, I hope. But you can get prejudice. You can get cruelty. You can get people turning a blind eye when they see something wrong and not speaking up. And it's difficult to do, right? Fortunately, it gets easier the older you get, right? This is the great secret, right? You get older and you don't really care what the hell people think.
Look what we did with the Japanese.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Canadians did it too. I didn't know until recently that the Canadians also had Japanese internment camps. Yeah, I'd never heard of it. I had a Canadian student who brought this up in class. She said, well, you know, we did it too. Oh, okay. Who knew? Yeah. Any other questions that you've got?
I can't understand why people are saying that some people are saying that this never happened and it's propaganda. How dare they? I mean, everything is documented.
Yeah, so there's really just 2 reasons. One, it's just so difficult to believe, right? I call these the innocent deniers. But most deniers are racist, anti-Semitic, and neo-Nazis. And they would like to bring something back like the Third Reich. The problem is the Holocaust. And if you're going to bring back the Third Reich, the first thing you have to do is make the Holocaust untrue. Because most normal people are going to say, I'm not signing up for this. No, no, no. So this is why they've got to get rid of the Holocaust. And you get these crazy people who say things like, oh, the dead bodies that are buried at Treblinka were certainly prisoners, but they died of starvation because this is what they claim, because the United States was blockading Germany, and so it's the Americans' fault. Yeah. Yes, Carlos.
How can we get more young people to be in a room like this?
Schools.
Yeah, I think going to the schools can absolutely help. It's the time of year, too, where even when kids are in classes, they're actually not in classes.
I read that close to 40% of millennials don't know much about the Holocaust at all.
Yeah.
And so many of the memes are out there that it didn't happen.
Yeah. I have found that at least at UNC, they're dying to get into my classes. They are beating down the doors to get into my classes. My Holocaust class is very, very popular. My Hitler's Germany class filled up after one day of the class being opened, and I've got a list of 12 kids who want to get in, some of whom will get in. I think ultimately most of them, all of them are going to get in. So I think there is interest, but yeah, and I think having these kinds of events are also really, really great. I think you're going to have a lot of young people who are going to be getting interested with the survivor that the committee brings in. I think the committee does a wonderful job with this kind of program. If any of you do anything with schools and you ever want a guest speaker to come in, I'd be happy to come. Just give me a call. I'm always in the history department. Yes?
I'm interested in the answer to the second part of his question. He started off with brainwashing and it's in fact indoctrination.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Yes.
How did the German
Yes.
people recover from that indoctrination?
Yeah, so there's two things. Number one, many Germans understood at the end of the war that Hitler was wrong, because all they needed to do was step outside of the front doorstep and see all of the rubble. However, there were public opinion polling that was done. I believe it's in 1947, 52% of Germans said that National Socialism was a good idea, badly carried out. So one of the things that the Americans, the British, and the French, and also the Soviet occupiers do is they re-educate the Germans. They completely revamp their curriculum. They bring in teachers to train a whole new cadre of teachers. But it's difficult to get that kind of thing out. This is one of the reasons that the Americans, the British, the French, and the Soviets hold the Nuremberg trials, which are held from 1945, the fall of 45. So the war ends in May. And the first round of the Nuremberg trials begins in the fall of 1945 and is completed in the fall of 1946. And these are widely broadcast as a way to educate the Germans of this is what happened and this is what you are complicit in. And the Nuremberg trials were just the first trials. There's actually 11 Nuremberg trials. They tried different kinds of people. And that's one of the major ways that they end up beginning to turn the German people away from their Nazi past. And you know, the Germans, by and large, particularly by the late 1950s, early 1960s, I think the Germans have recognized their responsibility to the past far better than, say, the French have with Vichy, right? It is very troubling to me, it's heartbreaking to me, that we've got the ADF, the Alternative for Germany, this radical right group that's rising in Germany right now. It's heartbreaking. They won 18% in the last national elections. I'm hoping that's their high point. When the Nazis had their first breakthrough, they also won 18% of the vote. So I'm really hoping that this is not a trend. But the turn to the radical right in Europe, and I would argue here as well, is extremely troubling. Yeah?
Does Austria still have on the books, it's against the law if you publicly deny the Holocaust?
Yes, it is. And also in Germany as well. Yes, that is a crime. Yes?
Let me just add to what you said. I know that as late as the late 1990s, there was a great apprehension in Germany that younger people were totally unaware and unfamiliar with the Nazi period. And this came to light when the government of Berlin decided to build the
memorial.
The memorial, two things, the Holocaust memorial, and also they had discovered the headquarters of the SS, which had been bombed out. And they wanted to rebuild it and use it as a learning device. And they surveyed a number of school children and young adults, asking them about, do you know about the SS? Do you know about the Gestapo? Do you know about Hitler, Goering, all the guys, as it were? And there was a remarkable ignorance about that among young people. Either they had learned about it and forgot about it, or they chose to forget about it.
Or they were, so that's shortly after the reunification.
Yeah, yeah.
The East Germans did not really do much education about the Holocaust at all. So in East Germany, places like Sachsenhausen and Buchenwald, these are major concentration camps, they were always interpreted as places where communists were imprisoned by the Soviets and had suffered. And East Germany made the argument that as a communist state, they were not the successor state to the Third Reich, and they had no responsibility for the Holocaust at all. And the fact that West Germany took that responsibility, paid reparations to Israel, for example, paid reparations to Holocaust survivors, later on slave laborers as well, that was proof that West Germany was a fascist state. Just like the Third Reich was. This is their ideology. So in those 1990 polls, one of the problems with those polls is that we aren't really sure whether the polling was tainted because we have all these kids from the former East Germany, right? But it's absolutely true that in the most recent polls in the United States and in Europe, that there is widespread ignorance. Now, I think you could probably poll children in the United States about the Civil War or about the War of Revolution and also find widespread ignorance. Colorado does not require the Holocaust to be taught. There are some German states that do require the Holocaust to be taught, but not all German states do that. And there are some states in the US that have a required unit, either in 8th grade or in 10th grade, where the Holocaust must be taught. And there are groups who are involved with trying to get that kind of curriculum put into place here in Colorado. There's certainly a lot of interest. I mean, again, I teach the Holocaust class, I teach a Nazi history class, and there's a lot of interest in those classes among the students at UNC. Any other questions? Let me take two more, okay, from people who haven't asked already.
Is there space to audit your classes?
Yes. Yes, there's always space to audit. Yes, you absolutely can audit. They always put me in a bigger classroom than what I need. We try to keep the numbers down to a dull roar. When Barry was the head of the history department at UNC, we had like over 400 majors, and our classes typically had, the Holocaust class, when he taught it, would have 65 students. Now most of our classes end up shaking down, well, my classes end up shaking down to about 30, 35. But the thing is, I don't want to have 35 students and have a colleague that has 7, because that would kind of tick me off. So we have to kind of spread the wealth, so to speak. And you had a question.
Did I understand, and maybe it's not correct, that Adolf Hitler was actually raised, was Jewish as a child? So
this is a rumor. So there's a great story behind this rumor. Here's the story. In the 1920s, when the Nazis were rabble-rousing in Bavaria, and particularly after the beer hall putsch, the communists started the rumor that Hitler himself was Jewish as a way to defame him. And this rumor has hung on, but there's no evidence whatsoever. His parents were Catholic. He was raised as a Catholic, although he was completely unreligious. But no, he was not Jewish. He was not Jewish. My constant joke, this is the last thing I'll say. Here's my joke about Hitler, okay? He was a vegetarian. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. And as far as we know, he never had sex. I think this explains a lot. Thank you so much for being willing to come.